Okay, some of us are Ferraris, some of us are SUVs, some of us are Jeeps. Okay, no judgment. The Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, right? But we need to lift our hoods and see what we are, because we might be a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track, or a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track, okay?
How do you define the word success? You may look up a generic definition, but the reality is only you can write your definition of success. Welcome to the Define Success podcast, where we help guide you to better understand and achieve success in all areas of your life. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at definesuccess_pod, on Twitter at define_success, and subscribe to any podcast platform so you never miss our Monday and Wednesday episodes each week. Welcome back, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of the Define Success podcast. I'm your host, Matt Lupi. You can find me on Instagram at Matt_Lupi and on TikTok at Matt Lupi. Today, we're going to be talking to another Navy SEAL. A couple weeks ago, we talked to the first Navy SEAL guest speaker of this podcast, Jason Redman. If you have not checked that one out yet, make sure you check it out after this episode. It was a great story about combat missions and different types of overcoming mindsets after you face adversity and face difficulty in your life. But this podcast, we're going to dive deep into what it takes to become a SEAL, what it takes to have a stronger mindset, a stronger physical condition. We're talking all about Hell Week, Budge training. If you have not looked into what it takes to go through this training, this episode is perfect for you. It's very inspiring to learn about what the human body is capable of and what other people have done and achieved to get to where they want to be and to get into these roles that they want to achieve in life. So Rich Diviney, we're talking all about what it takes to be a Navy SEAL, but then we also talk about how that translates into life. He is the author of the book, The Attributes, which I highly recommend you all check out. If you want to get into reading, I'm a big proponent. I'm a big advocate for reading, and it's a lot of what I learn, a lot of my mindset tips have come from reading books. And a great way to consume content, if you don't want to buy a book or sit down and read a book, get an audiobook. You can plug it in on a walk, when you're driving your car, doing laundry, cooking a meal, and it's easier than ever to consume audiobooks nowadays. Audible, we have a special deal with Audible right now that you can get a free month for free when you sign up with Audible using the link in the show notes. So make sure you check that out and get a free book for a month. That's really no disadvantage. Read something like The Attributes and learn something new, get better. But back to what we're going to be talking about today. Rich is an awesome person. He takes a lot of his mindset tips and his lessons that he wants to teach from neuroscience and psychology. And to be completely honest, these are subjects that I do not have any experience in. Maybe took a psychology class in high school, but not something that I'm very familiar with and how I can apply it to my life. But after speaking with Rich and what he's talking about with when something happens in your brain, these are the chemical impulses that are sent, or in these types of interactions, this is what your brain is doing. It was super interesting. And I think it's an important subject for, even if you don't want to read about it or, actively learn about it in a course, listening to a conversation like this or different podcasts opens up your mind to kind of understanding what goes on in your brain in different situations. Super cool conversation about all that stuff, because I think it's very new to everyone. But Rich, his signature thing, past the attributes and past the neuroscience, is moving through fear. And a lot of people, when they get into fearful situations, they want to flee and they want to avoid that at all costs. But Rich, he says we should embrace fear. We should kind of welcome it and then move through it and try to learn a valuable lesson. So hope you guys all enjoy episode 26 of the Define Success podcast. Again, this is our second Navy SEAL on the podcast. Really awesome conversation with Rich. I hope you guys get a lot of value out of it. Enjoy. Today's guest spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL, totaling 13 overseas deployments while in the service. As a SEAL, he held multiple leadership positions, which set him up for life after he retired in 2017. From his vast experience and interactions with hundreds of people, including some of the most elite performers in the world, Rich Diviney published a book, The Attributes, to share what it takes to succeed with optimal performance in all areas of life. Here to share his experience as a SEAL, leader, and author, and how we can operate at high levels is Rich Diviney. Rich, welcome to the Define Success podcast.
Yeah, Matt, great to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Good to meet you too. So can you just give us a background for people who don't know who Rich Diviney is? Where did you get to where you are today? And you might want to start with your military journey, because I love this story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it has to start a little bit before that. I grew up in New England. My dad was a private pilot, and by that I mean he was a lawyer, but he co-owned a single engine plane with a partner of his, and so he went flying every weekend with my brothers and sister and I. And my twin brother and I actually fell in love with it and wanted to be Navy pilots from the age of 6, prior to the Top Gun phenomenon. Top Gun just made us want to do it more, but so that was our focus. And it wasn't really until the early 90s, right when the first Gulf War happened, that I learned about the Navy SEALs. And so and I was like, "Ooh, that might be something I want to do." And I ended up at Purdue University in the ROTC program, and by the time I graduated, decided, I was going to try for SEALs, and went, graduated in 96, went through BUDS and graduated, which was cool. And so, it was only about 10% due. So there began a career. And of course, this was 96. So we were 5 years prior to 9/11. No one knew how kinetic and dynamic was going to get, but, it went that way, and proceeded to spend just under 21 years in the teams. Held many leadership positions, and also ran training for one of our really specialized SEAL commands. And that's really when I began, I think, my real fascination with human performance and defining it, and what are those elemental things that cause us to behave the way we did, and certainly kind of autopsying my performance. And I know we talk about success, right? I mean, I remember standing, even just graduating BUDS, or even standing around the guys I was with after getting into one of these specialized commands and saying, "How the heck did I get here?" Right? I mean, I just seem like I'm a fraud a little bit. But again, you start to realize that a lot of guys feel that way, and so you start to it made me kind of start asking these questions: where does performance come from, and how do we kind of maybe look at it a little bit deeper?
Awesome. So first off, what kind of pulled you toward the military, but also being a Navy SEAL? Because that's the average person does not gravitate towards that path. What kind of attracted you towards that kind of achievement?
I think it was there was a few things. First of all, back then, very few people knew what Navy SEALs were. I mean, it was not like it is today. It was they were in many cases the black sheep of the Navy and the military.
Oh, wow.
And so when I learned about them, it was really this magazine article that I saw, and the first thing I thought was, like, these guys are everywhere. They're underwater, they're in the jungle, they're in the desert, they're skydiving, they're in the Arctic, right? Sea, air, land. It was everything. It was all encompassing, and it's different. It was different than what the Army was offering, and what the Air Force and the Marine Corps were offering. And it had this water component that was very unique. I absolutely love the ocean. I love being underwater. I love I just love the water. And so this idea of coming from the water, like everything came from the water, and that the water itself, the ocean's fairly hostile to humans. I mean, you can't breathe. It gets cold, right? Bone crushing depths. And so the fact that SEALs made this environment their home, the audacity of that really attracted me. I was like, that's cool. And of course, there was this idea that very few people make it through. And again, maybe all of us kids do, but as kids, we look at James Bond, and we're like, ooh, I'd love to be James Bond, right? This was like in my mind, a way that I might be able to be James Bond, or at least do something close to that, right? So that's why I tried it, and ended up being pretty happy with my choice. I guess, especially since I made it, right? So
yeah. That's cool. I think especially with Navy SEALs, like, we all see the commercials, the videos, like everybody's like, oh, the elite soldiers, like, this looks really cool. You mentioned James Bond, and everybody's gravitating towards that aspect of it. But what a lot of people don't think about is what it takes to get there, and the iconic Hell Week, and what it takes to, like you said, graduate. About 10% of people graduate. What was that experience like? Can you kind of walk us through that brutal training?
Yeah, I can walk you through what I remember, I guess. I mean, you go through Hell Week, and it's funny. I was just with a good buddy of mine. He's actually in the book. He's in the chapter on conscientiousness, Chris. He and I were together yesterday at an event in Florida, and we were talking about our Hell Week. We were talking about buds and our experience there. And of course, when you can sit down with someone who went through with you, like in your class, you start to remember things that you hadn't remembered, little nuances. But Hell Week, buds holistically, it's a 6-month course, and you start, and I don't know, see the problem, well, I say problem, there's no problem. The difference in many of the kids today going to SEAL training is that they know a lot about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they've read up on it. They kind of go in with all this. I knew very little about SEAL training when I showed up. I was like, I was hit like it was almost, I was hit on the side of the head with like, oh my God, what the heck is this? And I read, right, but you just don't. I wasn't indoctrinated into it like you could be today. That, in fact, and Chris said the same thing, and that, in fact, we thought was advantageous, because it was almost like I didn't want to know. I just throw me in it, I'll do it, and then once it's done, cool. But ultimately, it's a very I guess a very growth-inducing experience, because you are learning so much about yourself, right? People ask often, how have you changed, or how did the Navy or SEALs change you? And my answer is usually, I don't think it changes most of us. I think what it does is it causes us to learn things about ourselves that were already there, but that previously hadn't been expressed. So you go through something like Hell Week. I mean, again, you start on Sunday afternoon, early evening. And they run you until the following Friday. They basically just do everything imaginable. You're cold, wet, sandy, tired. It's just nonstop. You sleep for about 2 hours the whole week, and that's the most quitting you get. And it's funny because Chris and I were talking about this yesterday. We both were talking about the moment in Hell Week we realized that people were actually quitting, because you're not focused on what's going on, you're just focused on surviving mostly. And each of us have a different moment. And for me, I think it was Tuesday morning at breakfast. We had a very cold, long night. And I remember sitting at breakfast, because they feed you. In Hell Week, they feed you 4 times a day, because they have to, right? You're going. And I remember sitting at breakfast at the chow hall and looking around and saying to myself, they must have the rest of the class out doing something, because this is not all of us. So this looks so small, right? And it didn't occur to me. It occurred to me a little later, but it didn't occur to me that we had so many quitters that night that we were just now this small crew. And Chris's epiphany came, I think, a little bit later, when we kept on had to reshuffle the boat crews, because you always had to do boat crews based on height, and so they always had to do a height line. And we kept on having to do height lines. And he was like, why do we keep doing these height lines? And finally, it's like, oh, it's because we keep on losing people, right? We have to shuffle the crews. So, it's a long answer. What I remember is it was very difficult. It was miserable, but every day was an accomplishment. Every time you got through a day of buds training, and of course, Hell Week, you pick and choose your rewards, right? You never think about the end of Hell Week at the beginning of Hell Week. If you do that, you'll quit. So you pick your rewards, and they're very. It's like they're kind of very short-term based, right? I'm going to make it to the next meal. I'm going to make it to the end of this sand berm, or I'm going to make it one more step. It could be that short. But I think that's what you learn, and that's what I remember, is that was the impetus to some very, very precise development on how to effectively move through stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because it only gets more chaotic in combat. And so BUDS is the unconscious genius of that system, is that it trains you to do that. It trains your mind to be able to chunk environments in a way that you can move through them, understand them, and perform inside of them. And it doesn't have to be pretty, just like Hell Week wasn't.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I'm glad you pointed out that it gets tougher in combat, because a lot of people, when they think of Navy SEALs, are like, oh, BUDS train, Hell Week, and then smooth sailing from there. But no, you're still expected to.
I tell you what, Matt, there was literally at least a dozen times in Hell Week where I said to myself, well, I guess they can't kill me, so I'll just stay here, right? I remember being in the surf zone, freezing, so cold. And I was like, oh my God, I mean, you just felt like you were going to die. And I said, well, I remember literally saying, well, I mean, they can't kill me. They're not allowed to kill me. So it's obviously not going to do that. You can't say the same thing about combat. That's a one huge difference. When you go to combat, that caveat does not exist, and it changes the dynamic tremendously.
Yeah, that is a big difference. And I'm sure training is designed so you can get to that level, get to that, preparation. But, you mentioned 90% of people drop out of BUD/S training, Hell Week. And it's very taxing physically, mentally, everything. I mean, you're cold. You mentioned all the stuff you go through. You don't sleep. And from my understanding, throughout the process, the trainer or whoever the instructors they're tempting you guys with coffee and donuts and everything and trying to pull you out and testing you to see if you'll quit. Yeah. What separates someone like yourself who makes it through and is part of that 10% and someone who maybe on Monday morning, they're like, hey, a warm shower sounds nice, I'm going to quit?
Gosh, you asked the question of the ages there, Matt. I mean, I think if, that's something, that one thing, if there it is, I don't think it's one thing, but that list of things, if we could pinpoint directly, then you could predict with some certainty as to who was going to make it through. And the community has not been able to do that, nor should there be too much effort put into that, because it's the environment that does that job. But not to dodge the question, I think the ability to compartmentalize effectively, and compartmentalization is this ability to focus on what matters in the moment, right? Prioritize what matters in this moment and block out everything else. And then once that's done, move to the next moment. And then once that's done, move to the next moment. You don't look at the entirety of the effort. This is how we behave naturally. If I put a big steak in front of you, and I said, okay, go ahead and eat this, right? You would not shove the whole thing into your mouth, right? You'd take it bite by bite. I mean, this is what we need to do neurologically too when we're moving through this. So I think the folks that show up with some predisposition of attributes, but also I think some experience in their past that helped develop that a little bit. I think that helps. I certainly talk about humor in the book. I mean, the ability to laugh and make jokes when things are miserable, that certainly helps. And I think there's one other factor that's a little bit more controversial, I think, and it has to do with this idea, and I talk about it in the book towards the end when I talk about these other attributes. This idea of a fear of rejection versus I don't care what people think. To the large extent, if not almost all, of guys who make it through have a little bit of an elevated fear of rejection. We don't want to look bad in front of our teammates. We don't want to fail in front of people, right? That is a very important factor, because almost every team guy you talk to, if you say, hey, why didn't you quit? I mean, why didn't you ring that bell? Most everyone at some point will say, I didn't want to be the one guy who stood up and did it, right? I did not want to be the guy who stood up and rung the bell. That's like, ugh, I can't. I would look bad. I'd be by myself. I'd be alone in doing it. This is why there's a phenomenon that happens in BUD/S where we were a no class. We were a no bell class, our class back in class 210. We were a no bell class, which meant nobody quit before we started Hell Week. That's pretty rare. So no one had quit our class when we went into Hell Week, and then we had a deluge of quitters. And one of the things that typically happens is you'll be in an environment and it'll be really tough, say surf torture, and one guy will stand up and he'll go and ring that bell, and suddenly you see just a whole ton of dudes do it, right? Because it's suddenly you're not alone in doing that. It's like, well, I'm going to take this chance because I'm not alone, and so I think this idea, metabolized correctly, of course, allowed a lot of us to stay put and not do that.
Yeah, that's definitely very important. A lot of people don't, have in their career path to go to the military. A lot of people don't think they have what it takes to become a Navy SEAL, whatever it may be. So they don't experience this kind of journey, this kind of personal growth. What kind of lessons did you learn from going through training, being in combat as a Navy SEAL, that you translated to other areas of life after your service?
Well, I mean, the biggest one, there were several. I mean, the biggest one is what I write the book about. I mean, this whole attributes thing. Where does performance come from? Performance really comes from two areas, skills and attributes. And attributes are way more influential in the way we perform than just skills. I mean, skills just define it in a very specific sense. but are the attributes we show up with, our levels of adaptability, discipline, self-efficacy, resilience, you name it. That really shapes and defines what our engine looks like going into life and going into situations. And I think so that idea was very influential in me kind of figuring this out and taking out to the rest of the world. Because again, we all want to figure out what engine we have, what engine we're working with. And SEAL training is a horrible example by which someone should measure themselves. I mean, it's like, might as well measure yourself. I mean, the same thing as if I were as a, and I don't even play football, but if I were to measure myself against Brady or Breeze, that'd be just insanely ridiculous. Or just like, some top engineer. I'm just not that engineer minded. So we don't want to use that measuring stick. But what we can do, what I'm interested in doing, and I know there's a lot of SEAL books out there, and I wanted to do a little bit differently than a lot of the SEAL books, was say, okay, how are Navy SEALs like everybody else? How are we the same as everybody else? Because we're all human. Yep. And so this attributes concept, this is elemental. This is how we show up, how we behave. So I think it's that. I think it's this idea of true confidence. When you do something like that, you gain what I call and what I would define as true confidence. And how I define that is the understanding that regardless of how the environment changes or degrades around me, I will figure it out. I am basically SEALs. What I used to call SEALs, I still do, are masters of uncertainty. That's what we are. It has nothing to do with shooting and diving and scuba and all the sexy stuff. It has to do with the fact that we are trained and we are we're developed. We are people who can be dropped into very complex, uncertain, ambiguous environments and figure it out, right? And again, it doesn't have to be pretty, right? It can be ugly, but I just know coming out of that and in my as I went through my career that I had that confidence. Just okay, whatever happens, I'll just figure it out when it happens. I'm not going to be that. I think is true confidence, and you certainly come out with that.
Awesome. Let's dive a little bit deeper into your book. So you wrote the attributes. Did this idea come from when you were a SEAL? When you were in the service, did you kind of think, okay, I want to write a book, or was it kind of after you retired, that was your next venture in life?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both, right? It came when I was the idea concept came when I was in the SEAL teams. I was put in charge of the assessment, selection, training process for one of our very specialized commands. And at this command, we took kind of top SEALs from all the other teams and brought them to ours and put them through our own selection process, about a 9-month course. And there was about a 50% attrition rate. Now any attrition rate is fine because that's what assessment and selection is. It implies attrition. However, what wasn't fine was that we weren't able to articulate effectively why some of these guys were dropping out, right? So it became frustrating for them who were here because we were saying, oh, you couldn't cut it or you couldn't shoot very well. That's BS, right? I mean, these guys were experienced dudes who came with really great records. So saying something like that is like a kick in the teeth. It wasn't. It wasn't satisfactory for us as cadre because it's like, well, we're not. If we can't understand it, then that doesn't mean we can't make it better. And then, of course, our leadership was like, hey, what the heck is going on? So when I was put in charge, one of the things that my commanding officer at the time asked me to do is, hey, Rich, can you take a look at this? We need to articulate this better. And so that's really when I began this dive into performance and this separation between attributes and skills. Because what we were seeing and what we were looking for was different than just the skills. So I suppose I should just give people a quick definition of the two, right? Skills are things that are not inherent to our nature, right? None of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or drive a car. Skills direct our behavior in known specific environments. Here's how and when to ride a bike or drive a car. And then, of course, because they're visible and didactic, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see them. You can see how well you can put scores and stats around skills. Okay, what skills don't tell us is how we show up and perform in stress, challenge, uncertainty when the environment is unknown, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult to apply a known skill. Okay, this is where we're really on attributes. Attributes are inherent to our nature. So we're born with elements and levels of adaptability, resilience, self-efficacy, situational awareness. Okay, certainly they develop over time, but you can see levels of this stuff in small children. So we're born with them. They inform our behavior rather than they dictate. Okay, so in other words, my son's levels of perseverance and resilience, for example, informed the way he showed up when he was learning how to ride a bike, learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. So they inform how we show up. And then because they're hidden in the background, they're not visible, they're very hard to measure, right? They're hard to see and therefore hard to measure. You really only see them during stress, challenge, and uncertainty, when the environment is so uncertain and difficult that you can't really apply a known skill. This is what happens in SEAL training. I thought back to my own SEAL training and my own BUDS experience, and we spent hundreds of hours running around with boats on our heads and hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and running around those things and freezing the surf zone. And then I had, at that point, done hundreds of combat missions overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. I had done thousands of training evolutions. Never on one of those did I carry a boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole. I never carried one again. I've never carried a 300-pound telephone pole again. So what they were doing to us in SEAL training was not training us. They weren't training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs at that time. They were putting us into these environments to tease out these attributes, these hidden qualities, these traits, to see if we had what it took to do the job. And so when we think about attributes, we have to think about the fact that this is what drives our performance at a very elemental level. And if we understand how we show up to the game, in other words, what levels of each attribute we have, because we all have all of the attributes, okay? Just the differences are the levels of each that we have. If we understand how our levels are, we start to understand our performance, and we start to say, okay, this is why, and this is how I show up. And it gives us a little bit more confidence in how we're going to show up in environments of uncertainty and challenge.
That's awesome. I'm seeing a lot of different opinions, reading books and everything. If some people are saying, like, if you have a strength, develop it, only focus on that. Or on the other side, build up a weakness. If you understand where your weak are, work on that skill and bring it up. So in your opinion, if someone is, born with the attribute of, let's say, perseverance, like you said, but they don't have the attribute of trusting other people or that kind of that trait, do you think it makes sense to try to train the other missing attributes, or just focus in on those attributes that you know and understand and really develop those as best as you can?
Yeah, it's a great question. Any time you see a lot of debate on an issue where you see both sides being argued fairly cogently, it means the answer is somewhere in the middle. And so, as it goes, so it goes for this answer as well. It depends. Okay. Here's what I'd say, and the reason why I like attributes and kind of people figuring out their own kind of unique collection. We are all like automobiles. Okay. Some of us are Ferraris, some of us are SUVs, some of us are Jeeps. Okay. No judgment. The Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, right? But we need to lift our hoods and see what we are, because we might be a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track, or a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track, okay? It's likely, if we're a Jeep running on a Jeep track, that our lives feel fairly congruent, okay? And we feel like, okay, I'm kind of doing what I like to do. I'm kind of in the zone in terms of what I like to do. If our lives feel full of friction and incongruent, it might be because we're a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track or vice versa. So the idea would be, look at the attributes palette that you have and then say, okay, where should I place myself? Okay. And you could decide either one, right? You could say, hey, I've been a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track all this time. I'm going to go find a Jeep track, in which case you're going to go and you're going to capitalize on some of your strengths. And it'll feel good, and success will begin to come, okay? But you also, because we have free will, say, no, I'm a Jeep, but I want to run on this Ferrari track. Mm-hmm. That's okay. It's just going to be a little bit more work. This is where you're going to have to say, okay, there are some attributes that I'm low on, okay, because I don't have the engine the Ferrari does. And I'm going to have to work on developing those attributes so that I can run better on the Ferrari track, right? So it really depends on you. What people have to understand is they shouldn't endeavor to be optimal on all the attributes. In other words, have the optimal level of all the attributes, because, or I shouldn't, optimal is the wrong word, have high levels of all the attributes, okay? Because the niche that you're in may not require that, okay? And in fact, high levels on certain attributes in the specific niche you're in may be detrimental to your performance. I always joke that the stand-up comic shouldn't be too high on empathy, okay? Because how can he or she find funny at a funeral if they're too empathetic? Okay, so too much empathy may be a detriment to the stand-up comic in certain contexts, right? So you don't need to work on everyone. So I would say, figure out what you want to do, figure out the niche inside you which you want to perform, then ask yourself, okay, out of all of that, what are the one or two attributes that I may want to that I'm a little bit lower on, that if I develop will actually assist in my performance in this niche. That's how I would approach that.
That's awesome. These are great ideas. I urge everyone to go buy the attributes and read up on this even more. But for people that don't have the SEAL training, they don't have, pushing themselves to the limits of trying to figure out what their attributes are. Say we're just, working a 9 to 5, or we're in school right now. How can we find these attributes and understand them so that we could take that next step in life? If we want to start a business, if we want to start a podcast, or go off and try a new career, whatever it may be, how can we hone in on these?
Yeah, that's another great one. And here's the idea. You don't need SEAL training, okay? Life is SEAL training. Life is full of ups and downs, okay? Life is, so I actually, COVID is a great example of life throwing all of us a curveball that we didn't expect. And I kind of say, in SEAL training, people had asked me, hey, what was harder, SEAL training or COVID? And I said, well, first of all, it's hard to compare, but I will tell you this. SEAL training, a couple things existed. Yes, it was hard, but I wanted to be there. I chose to be there. And I could always leave. If I wanted to leave, I could leave. I had the choice to leave, right? COVID, none of us chose to be there, and none of us could leave. Okay, so there we have it. There is a stressful environment, challenging environment that was thrown into our lap, inside of which we were leaning on our attributes. And so the idea is, regardless of what age you are, the older you are, the more I guess experiences you could interrogate. But regardless of how old you are, interrogate the experiences you've already been through, because you've already been through experiences that have teased out attributes. Now, I will concede that if you're younger, say in college like you are, you may be at a position where you have some dormant attributes, right? You have not had some experiences that have drawn out some of those attributes. So the idea would be, okay, I'm going to go seek those if I want to. And you can go find environments that put yourself into challenge and stress. I mean, there's so many different things you could do. But ultimately, if you just want to be someone who just kind of goes for success, like you talk about, okay, you have to succeed at anything requires deliberately placing yourself outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It requires a little bit of risk. It requires a little bit of, sometimes a lot of risk. It requires vulnerability. It requires discomfort. Okay. Anytime you are in discomfort and risking and outside your comfort zone, you are working with attributes. Okay. So if you want to succeed, then you're going to have to find environments that are risky, uncomfortable, and uncertain. You're going to throw yourself in those, and you will start to understand your attributes a little bit better.
Yeah, that's great advice. Something that I want to do almost every day. Find that discomfort, get out of my comfort zone, because that's where the growth is. And you're never going to get better if you just stay where your comfort zone is and everything. Rich, when you look at successful people, these business owners, other SEALs, yourself, are there any attributes you see as themes? Maybe the top important ones across that kind of realm of people of success?
Yeah. So I try to be very careful about ranking the attributes in terms of what are the most important. So I would say my initial answer to that is it really depends on what you are trying to do. Okay. Success in an athletic endeavor is going to require a different set of attributes than success in a academic endeavor or a military endeavor or whatever. Okay. Vice versa, whatever that is. So that's the broad-based answer. However, I think all successful people have and need probably all of the grit attributes. So courage, perseverance, adaptability, and resilience. Okay, those are going to be required. Okay, because it's going to take being outside your comfort zone. And I think all successful people are going to need a lot of the drive attributes, because again, so grit talks about the attributes that allow us to perform through those more acute, short-term challenges, and the drive attributes talk about those attributes that allow us to achieve and perform through those longer term endeavors, like the things that take a while. Okay, and that's whatever like being a lawyer or being a SEAL or being a writer, whatever those things are. So I think the drive attributes are probably the grit attributes, and the drive attributes I would imagine are probably the predominant in, or I guess certainly optimal levels of each are predominant in those people who are habitually successful.
Awesome. Rich, you touched on it a little bit today, but I've in previous conversations that I heard that you were in, you mentioned a lot about neuroscience, like psychology, and how we can kind of understand our mind to get to where we want to be and be a higher achieving person. Can you kind of explain because I'm not, very experienced in that field. So what's your mindset and how we can best utilize these.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to the user. I mean, some people don't really like the neuroscience stuff. I love neuroscience. I'm a geek about it, and I'm not a neuroscientist, obviously, but I have friends who are, and I love hanging out with them because I learn so much and I can ask questions. For me personally, I love having quantifiable data and science that can back why things are happening in my physiology, in our performance, all that stuff. So, and neuroscience begins to help explain that. The idea of neurotransmitters and dopamine and serotonin, all these chemicals that our body produces in certain states, really start to speak to why and how we perform the way we do. And so, I think it's interesting, and I all of the authors I've always loved and admired, always, in especially nonfiction runs, always in the context and conduct of their argument in their books, always wrap in some sort of science and neuroscience about it, because it hammers it home. It takes the concept from, hey, this is something I'm thinking, to, hey, this is something I'm thinking, but here's some proof and examples as to why. And so I think that's why I really love that stuff. You have to be careful in terms of, some people really don't like it. I mean, I've had people who've read the book and I love the neuroscience. I have other people who read the book and I skipped over the neuroscience stuff, right? So there has to be a balance there for people, but it's really up to you as an individual. I like to throw it in there because I'm a geek about it. I have to tailor my desire to throw too much in, because it could turn some people off. But I think it does help put some structure to some of these ideas.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think it kind of has to go with what you said of, if you're a Jeep or if you're a Ferrari, understand what you have under the hood. We have a lot of stuff in our brain that a lot of people don't even know what's going on. So the better we can understand it, the better we can achieve. So it's definitely a good subject to read up on and try to understand a little bit more. Rich, I've heard you say multiple times, moving through fear and moving past fear and all this stuff around getting away from fear in our life. Can you explain your philosophy and mindset with this?
Yeah, there's certainly not getting away from fear. We're not going to do that. But moving through fear, that gets into the neuroscience. Okay, what we have to understand about fear is as fear begins to, fear is basically our amygdala in our brain starting to sense threat. Okay, once it begins to sense threat, depending on the severity, we begin to feel fear. Okay, and as we begin to feel fear, obviously our physiology changes, breathing heightens, pupils dilate. So there's physiological changes in our system. So our palms start to sweat. As the fear response goes up, we have more of a physiological response. Palms start to sweat, mouth dries, things like that. One of the main things that happens when we start to feel fear is our brains are going to give us a choice. Or I say give us like we're separated, but we will have a choice. Our brains, there will be a choice there. One choice is to fight, and one choice is to flee. Okay. Now, there's been talk about the freeze response, right? Fight, flight, freeze. Freeze response really neurologically is an oscillation between the two. It's basically you're basically trying to decide between fight or flight. Okay. But fight and flight, they are actually separate circuits in the brain. Okay. So in other words, if you flee, there's a circuit that gets tripped in your brain that says, okay, flee, go, right? Fight or step into the fear. There's a different circuit that gets flipped. That is the courage circuit. Okay. And and once we flip that, by the way, once we flip the courage circuit, we decide to step into our fear, we are given a dopamine reward by our system. So our systems are designed to reward us for stepping into our fear. Now, I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to the neuroscientists about the reward system for flee, but because sometimes the right answer is to flee. That's survival mode. But it's also why sometimes if we have an amygdala overload, right, sometimes we flee without even thinking because our bodies just want to survive, and we're in survival mode. But as a species, we are designed to step into discomfort, step into our fear. This is why we are natural explorers and curious. Okay, this is what's taken us as a species from cave dwellers to space explorers. This idea that we are rewarded for discovery, finding new things, stepping out of our comfort zone. We have to recognize that, and then we can, if we understand that about our neurology, we can then start to wrap an entirely different definition around fear and moving through fear. Okay, moving through fear is required for growth. moving through fear is required for discovery and exploration. Now, another caveat. Fleeing is also sometimes required. So I always avoided and still avoid, and I recommend anybody to avoid anyone who claims to be fearless. Okay, fearlessness is dangerous and in some cases idiotic. It's running into the fire without thinking about it. Okay, we have a risk threat detector for a reason, to keep ourselves appropriately assessing risk. That's what it's there for, right? So we want fear because fear allows us to appropriately assess risk. And sometimes when we do that assessment, we decide to flee, and that's sometimes a good decision. But we can also do that assessment and say, wait a second. Most often in today's world, that fear, once we actually do that assessment, it's like, okay, this is unfounded. Let me step into it, right? That's most often what happens. But that's the idea. Moving through it is a neurological process, and we get rewarded for it. And if you do it more often, that is also a key to success.
Yeah. There's a quote that says something along the lines of the difference between, or the only thing lying in between where you are right now and where you want to be is fear. So if you want to start a business, there's the fear of, okay, I might lose money. Right. If you want to be a SEAL, there's the fear of, this is going to suck. It's going to hurt. Right. I'm going to be challenged. So everybody's initial mindset is fear. And I don't want to do this because I'm afraid of what might happen and consequences that might come with this. So how can we get past that? Because it's something that I have definitely tried to develop, is getting past, like you said, getting into uncomfortable situations and moving away from the initial voice in your brain that's saying, don't do this. Mm-hmm. For everyone else who might not be on the same wavelength right now, what can we do to move through this fear and recognize it, but then still continue to push forward?
Yeah, and I think moving through is a better way to define it than getting past. Okay, that's really what you need to do, is move through. And the idea is to understand it and analyze it. That's how we start to move through it. Because if we really ask ourselves the questions, okay, why am I afraid of this? What are those things? And I'm not talking about just do a cursory kind of thought process. I'm talking about sitting down maybe with a pen and paper and asking yourself, if you are truly committed to a goal and you find yourself stalled because of fear, or even stalled at all, you may have to say, what am I afraid of, right? That might be the first question you ask. I think the diligence in answering those questions and doing the thought around that often is enough to allow someone to begin to move through it. Because usually when we actually articulate it is when we realize it's actually not that big a deal, or doesn't even exist. Sometimes our fears, we have to understand as humans, sometimes our fears don't even exist. They're things that we think or perceive, and they're not even real. And I think, what's that thing? What's the acronym that people use for fear? Fictional examples assumed real, something like that. I can't remember it because it's a fun acronym, but it's only accurate part of the time. Sometimes fear or these things we do fear are in fact very real. Okay, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they are actually fictitious, and so the examination of that allows us to do that and move through it. So I'd say just think about it. Think about it. If you're stalled, if you are hesitant, ask yourself why. And what are those things? A couple of ways you can do that. What's the worst that can happen? Okay, what's the best that can happen? And those types of questions will often illuminate people's pathway to the extent that you can say, okay, I'm good. I'll take a couple steps down this road. I'm fine. And it's okay to reevaluate as you keep on going, because the fear is never going to stop. I shouldn't say it's never going to stop. It's going to change, right? We're always, as humans, as we go on these explorations, you'll have fear about something. Listen, I'm 48 years old. I've done 21 years in the Navy SEALs, right? Done hundreds of combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now I've written a book and I'm starting a business, whole new concept. So I still have fear. I still am examining and exploring my fear, and I always will be. And I plan to until the day I'm, getting ready to pass over, right? Because I think that's part of growth. And so I think analyze it and ask about it and question it, and you'll do better.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Like, I like that you mentioned that you still have fear today. Just because you graduate from the SEAL training, you're not just removed from fear altogether. Right. Like you still see it writing a book, starting a business, and so important. Fear is something I see a lot, and making up fear as being a student, a lot of people, we have assignments, exams, finals week. We create stress and fear because we don't know what's going to come. We're thinking of these long days of studying or a tough exam coming up next week. And you get past it and you're thinking that really wasn't that bad. Like I kind of stressed myself out a little bit too much. And I want to ask you, what's the balance between making sure you're not stressing yourself out too much and being too fearful, but also creating a little bit of pressure and not thinking, oh, this exam's going to be a piece of cake. I don't need to study, or this book will sell out. Like, I don't need to put that much work into it. Like having a little bit of pressure to work to what you want.
Yeah, I think to do that, we need to separate two concepts. One is fear and the other is worry. Okay. Because they're two different things. Fear is good. It's a wonderful driver to get us to take action. A little bit of fear of a final exam will drive you to say, okay, I need to prepare. And I need to sit down and say, what do I need to prepare to do this, and this? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, once you do that, all right, what you're talking about, at least part of what you're talking about, is that people fall into this pattern of worrying about the future, okay?
Yeah, right.
There's a difference between fear and worry, okay? Worrying is absolutely of zero value to us because unless, I would say, unless we haven't prepared, which means we're fearful, and we haven't done what we're supposed to do. We haven't effectively risk assessed, okay? Worrying about, but even if you haven't prepared, worrying about something in the future is just wasted energy, you know? And so I think in terms of college and finals, like, okay, I have these finals next week. I want to make sure I'm prepared. There's a little bit of fear because I want to do well. What do I need to do to effectively prepare? I'm going to do that. And then I'm not going to worry about it, okay? Mm-hmm. Because what happens is going to happen. I have prepared, I'm ready to go. And whatever happens, happens. And so this is where you can really begin to perform optimally in your life, because worry will suck your energy all the way until the actual event, and you'll show up to the event depleted. That's what worry does. Versus, preparation and saying, okay, and again, just there might be still a little bit of fear, but you've appropriately risk mitigated. You're like, okay, but I'm not going to worry about it. All right. A great example is I often say this, it was so often we'd be in a helicopter get inserted into a combat mission. Okay. And the guys around me were asleep. They were napping. Okay. So this is something you don't necessarily see in some of the movies. You see a lot of hoo-yah, blah, blah, all fired up, all this adrenaline. That's exactly the opposite of what happens. We are all always managing and optimizing our energy. We're not worrying about that which we can't control in the moment. Okay. Mm-hmm. We've done our preparation, we've done our diligence, and we are going to go figure it out when we get there. Because we've done all we can to prepare. There's no need to worry. And so I will tell you and anybody who's listening, who's still in college and doing exams, if Navy SEALs can be sleeping but my buddies who were in the helicopter to go get bin Laden, they were asleep on the way in. Okay. Mm-hmm. If SEALs can sleep in a helicopter on the way in to go to a huge mission like that, you can certainly not worry about a final. But that doesn't mean you're not prepared for it. That doesn't mean you haven't done the diligence to do what you need to do. But once you've done that, just don't worry about it. It is what it is. Go do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that the same mission where when they were extracting, they were getting shot down and had to get away?
They did not get any. They did not get any resistance going in or out. The only thing that happened on that one was the helicopter crashed on insert into the compound there. That was not anticipated. So they had to blow up that one and go out on another one.
Okay.
But again, they had done some initial planning. Hey, if the helicopter goes down, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this, this, and this. And they're like, okay, I'm not going to worry about it. We're just going to do. If it happens, it happens, and it happened to happen, right? So they just dealt with it when it did.
Yeah, awesome. Rich, before we get into these final three quick questions, can you plug yourself? Where can people find you on social media? Your book? Where do you want people to be redirected after this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and I think that's all of them, right? Most of them. But anyway, the one-stop shop is the website, theattributes.com. You can find out, you can get the book, you can get links to get the book. You can do the free attributes assessment that we have online that you can figure out where you stand on some of these attributes. The social media handles are there and some blog articles and things like that. So theattributes.com, probably the one-stop shop.
Awesome. We'll link that in the show notes. So everybody make sure you check that out after the episode. Rich, what gets you out of bed in the morning?
My family. Sometimes literally, but I'm usually the one who gets up first. But Yeah, I mean, at this point in my life, it's different, by the way, for me than it is for you at the point in your. When I was at your point, and when I was at the point you are in life, I was really focused on me and my goals and what I want to do, and that's exactly where you should be. And everybody who's listening, if you're at that point, be that way. And you're going to find different. You're going to find as you get older, you're going to find different focus points and different priorities, and we have to basically weigh those as we go through. But at this point, I should say, as soon as I started having a family, they were always priority. I love the fact that I'm home most of the time. I love the fact that I can be here with my teenage boys. My eldest son getting ready to go to college here soon. That is very important to me. That's what gets me up. I think that, I mean, it always did get me up when I began to have a family. It'll get me up all the way until I depart this. I like depart this earth. I at least go back to the flora and fauna that is the earth.
That's great. How do you define success?
I think well-being. I think a human well-being is success. If you wake up and you are happy and satisfied, and you are in a position where you are you're not at the bottom of the what is it, the Darwin hierarchical needs chain.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what that actually is called, where it's like survival, right?
Yeah.
But if you're at a position of the chain where you can actually think about others and think about some things that are higher than yourself, you can explore new ideas and discover. That's how I define success. Freedom of expression, freedom of finances, freedom of movement, freedom of family. Free to do and express yourself the way you'd like to do so, and I think that's how I define success.
Great answer. Last question for you. We talked about a lot today, and there's a lot of advice people can take with them. But what are 1 to 2 steps of action that we can take today, tomorrow, whenever it is, to get closer to success?
All right. So first thing you can do, and it has to do with how our brains work, okay? And this is called asking better questions. Well, our brains are wired to ask questions. That's what they do. They do it oftentimes in our unconscious. They do it unconsciously, like when we're figuring out the world. But if we deliberately place a question into our frontal lobe, our brain begins to answer it whether we like it or not, okay? A lot of times we do this without thinking, and we do it the wrong way. We say, why am I so bad at this? What's wrong with me? Why does this always happen to me? As soon as you ask yourself that question, your brain will start to give you answers. And I guarantee you're not going to like them, and they're probably not going to be very empowering. And a lot of them will probably be BS, by the way. Every single high performer I've ever met, high performing team, I learned this trick back when I was in high school. Take charge of the questions you ask yourself, all right? Ask yourself better ones. How can I grow from this? What can I do? Who's out there that can help me? What am I good at? Those questions, those answers will also start to populate your brain, all right? Mm-hmm. And you will begin to move towards where you want to move. And I'm a big believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we ask ourselves on a consistent basis. So ask yourself better ones, and your quality of life will change. You can do this like tomorrow. You can do this today. You can start doing it right now. The second thing is I'm always kind of saying, hey, when we're looking at those goals that we set and how we define success in the moment, okay, wherever we are in life, be resolute in the outcome, but flexible in the approach. Okay. This is where the rock climbers can teach us a lot. Okay. The rock climber sits and looks at the cliff or the mountain, and at the base looks up and says, okay, I'm going to map out a rough plan of where I think I'm going to go on this rock. Okay. But then they know that they have to start climbing. And when they start climbing, as they climb, they're going to realize that the original plan that they thought that was going to work is not going to work. They have to change their route because there's actually that what they thought was a handhold or a foothold is not. So they have to go a different way. And sometimes as they're climbing, they realize that the best next handhold or foothold is actually like over here to the right and down, which means they're going to have to start moving away from their objective to get to a better position so they can move towards it. Okay. This is how it's going to feel with our goals sometimes. Okay. Sometimes it's going to feel like we're moving away from our goals, but we should look at it as it's probably because we're just getting a better handhold or foothold, so we can get up that peak. So be flexible in the approach. It's never, ever, I guess I should say never, but almost never going to go the way we thought it would. So we have to be able to adapt. And I think that's the advice.
Awesome. That's great advice right there. Rich, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Matt. Hey, pleasure of mine too. Good luck and thanks for having me on.
Thank you. Again, a huge shout out to Rich for joining the episode. Really great conversation with him. I know I learned a lot. I hope you guys all got some value out of it as well. Again, his book, The Attributes. If you are interested in getting this book in any capacity, make sure you check out our Audible link in the show notes. You get a free book, and we also have a few other partnerships going on right now: Strong Coffee, Cured Nutrition, and Instacart. If you want savings on any of them, the links are in the show notes. Save yourself some money, try something new. But my biggest takeaway from this episode, my interview with Rich, and just talking to him in different formats, is find your attributes. You know, he differentiates attributes from skills, in that skills are something that you can work on. Attributes are something that you're born with. I want you to think to yourself right now, and you don't need to decide right now. It could be something you think about this week, but what are your attributes? What comes naturally to you that doesn't come naturally to many other people? What do you find enjoyment in that most other people don't find enjoyment in? Start thinking of that. You know, challenge yourself, uncover what it is, whether it's a communication skill, leadership, anything physical, whatever it is. We all have attributes. We all have something that differentiates us and sets us apart, something we can use to our advantage. You might have some talents out there that you aren't even utilizing. You could be becoming a more fulfilled person. You could be becoming more successful. You could be making money off of it, monetizing that skill. So figure it out. Urge you all to find your attributes. If you need any more help, send a message to Rich. Make sure you loop him in. Also, check out his book. So I thank you all for listening to the Define Success podcast. We have passed 25 episodes. This is episode 26. And really, it's just amazing to see the journey so far throughout 3-4 months. The amount of guests that I've had on, the guests in the future that we're bringing on, and just the support from the audience. So if you have been listening, whether it's for one episode or for all 26 episodes so far, I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your support. If you ever have any feedback, any suggestions, any questions, any comments, anything that you find value in, you want to share, send me a message at definesuccess_pod on Instagram, or my personal Matt_Lupi. I love seeing the feedback and the conversation that start between myself and my audience. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. Again, if you enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with someone you love and spread success to those around you. I would greatly appreciate any shares in any format. Remember, success is not something that happens overnight. You made a great decision to spend your time with us today, and I hope that you feel closer to being successful. Success requires stacking small wins every day, and today is a great day to win.